Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Franz Tapon. In this episode, we talk about poaching versus anti-poaching. We talk about South Africa's Greater Balepye Nature Reserve. Two of them are from South Africa, one of them is from Texas, and they're all united in an effort to conserve Africa's wildlife. African Wildlife Services is a company that they work underneath effectively, and they're doing their best to service the animals and the community at the same time. And it's an interesting balance, what they have to fight. There's issues of how much hunting should we do? How much photographic safari should we do? Where's our emphasis? And you can see their struggle in how to make sure that the Homo sapiens who live in that land actually benefit too, as well as protecting the animals that live on that land. It's a tricky issue, it's not easy, and it may not be what you might have thought is the best solution. Tell me what you think. Please become a patron so that you can get rewarded for supporting this show. The rewards are really cool, especially the $25 reward. I'm your host, Franz Tapon. In this episode, we have 3 guests today, and luckily they each have their own unique accent, so you'll be able to tell them apart. So let's start off with the hardest name for me to pronounce, Prince Benjamin Dipati Maenetja.
I'm from South Africa, in a province called Limpopo, in the community called Balepye, in Mopani district.
My name is Ebersöhn. I'm also from South Africa. I operate as a hunting outfitter and a counter-poaching service provider, as well as an ecological advisory consultant to the wildlife industry. And we work with Prince Maenetja and his community project called the Greater Balepye Nature Reserve, as well as with our next guest, I think.
My name's T. Wayne Schwertner. I'm an associate professor of wildlife science at Tarleton State University in Texas, and you can probably tell by my accent I am not from South Africa.
Exactly. That's what I love about this conversation, because we all have our unique accents, and so therefore listeners will be able to follow along. Okay, so let's start off with you, Prince Maenetja. Tell us a little bit about the project that you're collaborating with. You've got a Texan here, you've got a fellow South African with you. And tell us about the project that you're working for your community.
These projects try to establish the population of the leopards in collaboration with the university. So our expectation is to see how the numbers look like in that particular space. We have different species there, but this one will give us an idea, especially when we mobilize and lobby CITES in terms of looking at quotas and every other species, like the mobilization of the rhino horn. So for me, it is a very, very good project because it is scientific based. It deals with the science of the wildlife. And for that matter, we as a community were excited about it.
Give some background to the listeners regarding the area. Originally, it was kind of taken away, and how did you get it back, etc.?
We can't say beneficiary of the land because we were staying there. And at the time of apartheid in South Africa, we were removed and taken to separate areas as a community scattered all over the country with the land reform program from government. Government, what it does, it buys land back from the owners, especially you claim the land. And there is what we call the willing buyer, willing seller. If the farmer want to sell this land to a community which was removed, the government buy this land back to us. So now they bought around 22,000 with estimated 70,000, which need to be bought, which we believe in our lifetime it can be bought if the resources for government are there. But in terms of this project, when these other the farmers left the area, we revitalized the area and started the project of conservation because it was used for that. Instead of putting people there and being able to be eaten by the animal, we restored the area to become one of the big projects in the area and challenge the status quo.
Tell us a little bit about, Louis, the 3 organizations that are involved in this, the 3 ways you separated, the aerial, wildlife services, etc.
Thank you, Francis. Yes, and what we've tried to do is to create a vessel or a business model that would present a favorable narrative and an image of the hunting industry. And we looked for a specific project like the Balepye project, which was restituted land, so that we can address that issue whereby we are claiming land back in favor of biodiversity from other practices like mining or agricultural commercial farming practices. So the business model entails providing a holistic one-stop solution to the wildlife industry. And it consists of 3 companies in our stable. Aerial Wildlife Services, which consults and advises on ecological management practices and land use. Then we have a counter-poaching company called African Wildlife Security, which specializes in counter-poaching operations. We have canine units and helicopters in support of that business model or business. And then we have African Wilderness Safaris, which caters to ecotourism, both consumptive as well as non-consumptive. So it creates a one-stop solution to a landowner like Prince Benjamin and his community, that we can advise, assist and facilitate the project development and also the business that they are trying to do with their community. So there's real and tangible benefits to the community through poverty alleviation, job creation, education and training in cooperation with Tarleton State University, with our friend T. Wayne Schwertner, doctor. And we're very excited to look into and develop exchange student programs, because we're trying to train the custodians or stewards, if you will, or the managers, the next generation of conservationists, biodiversity managers. And that is very exciting.
What I'm not totally clear on is the first one. You've got African Wilderness Safaris as one company, that's classic safaris, whether it's consumptive or not consumptive. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the security, that's the anti-poaching unit. They're securing the wildlife.
Counter-poaching.
What did I say? Poaching?
You said anti-poaching. It's a common mistake. Most people talk about anti-poaching without knowing the difference between counter-poaching and anti-poaching.
Educate us.
Right. There are the counter-poaching is counter-insurgency operations from the military textbook. Okay, so there are 2 sets of rules in the world. When it comes to designated war zones, you have a handbook under the Geneva Convention that has the rules of engagement. All right? And then in civil society, you have the use or another handbook which encompasses the rules for the use of force. So there are different sets of rules. And when it comes to poaching or illegal wildlife trafficking, you are dealing with a insurgency type or like industry and insurgent. The poacher is an insurgent or equivalent to, you can be compared to an insurgent, a guerrilla type of warfare. Mm-hmm. And for that to exist, the counters that exist for that, countermeasures, is called counter-insurgency operations. So because we are in a civil environment, we don't use the military terms. So they don't talk about counter-poaching, but they talk about anti-poaching. But the anti-poaching is not a legalized, structured business, because private security must be registered and must be regulated. We can't have a bunch of vigilantes or mercenaries coming into our country, dictating to us, or prosecuting people, suddenly making arrests, chasing people, investigating people. Under what license? Under what permit? So it has to be registered and controlled. And that's the difference between anti-poaching operations and counter-poaching operations. There's a legitimate operation which is registered and controlled by sovereign countries' laws and legislation. And then there's anti-poaching operations, which is basically just
militia. It's like a militia?
It's vigilantes, militia. It is not formalized. Mm-hmm. because it's not regulated. But Africa, contrary to what a lot of people may think, is actually a lot of sovereign states which need to be respected. So don't think you can come there with your special forces with respect to my colleagues in the industry, and come and pursue people or investigate people or arrest people. You're a tourist.
Understood. So, speaking of tourists, let's go to tourists. No, I understand. No, but to the Dr. Wayne, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this and why should people in Texas care about what's going on in South Africa?
So I and my team, we provide the academic support, the research support to the project. And we got involved a year or two ago through some mutual network acquaintances. And found out about this project. We were very intrigued and excited about the project for two reasons. First off, it's the opportunity to do important research for leopard conservation. And that's our primary motivation in everything we do, is how can we inform conservation so that not only our generation but generations to come will have robust wildlife populations wherever that may be, whether that's in the United States or in Africa, with the case of leopards. So we were very excited about that opportunity. We were also very excited about this novel approach with the restitution of the land to the Balepye people and the conversion over to this nature reserve. So it was really getting in on the ground floor of a novel conservation approach. South Africa has a tremendous track record of wildlife research and wildlife conservation, and I don't, I bring a small part, a tiny little part to that, but I hope that I can contribute to wildlife conservation in South Africa and in leopard conservation in South Africa. Now you ask, why should Americans care? And I think that anybody who cares about the environment should care about healthy, robust wildlife populations and biodiversity. And again, whether that's in Southern Africa, whether that's in the Arctic, whether that's in your own backyard, the health of the planet is intimately tied with biodiversity. And so that's what drives me, my team, my department, my university.
There's also the scientific data that they collect assist us to inform our government in South Africa in terms of population density to determine those quotas for international trade. The scientific research serves to inform CITES, international trade regulating organizations and bodies, IUCN.
By CITES, people may not know what CITES is all about, so you might explain that.
CITES is the Council for International Trade in Endangered Species. I think they were formed, speaking under correction, in the middle 70s. Prince Benjamin, can you remember?
Yeah, I think it's 69.
Yeah, I'm speaking under correction, yes. But that is most of countries in the world that are from the Geneva signatories, United Nations supporters, are signatories to international trade agreements, bilateral agreements. So they formed this body to promote and regulate trade. However, at the last COP, the Conference of Parties in Geneva, where they were supposed to use scientific data to inform trade regulations, that got chucked out. It's like out the door. So there was rulings impacting on rural communities in Africa taken at the COP meeting that affects people's livelihoods and their basic human rights to a livelihood and an income, which is ridiculous. So we rely heavily on the science from Tarleton State University and Dr. Schwertner's team to inform U.S. Fish and Wildlife, that informs international trade regulations and policies. Also to publish, hopefully, non-detrimental finding in terms of specific species like the leopard, like you mentioned before, or the lion, or whichever species is applicable here, elephant.
It could also be helpful to have an objective third party kind of looking at this, because if you say that there's 100 leopards in the wild and in fact there's only 50, then you give a quota that is too high, and that will help decimate the population. So it's so important to know exactly how many leopards, or at least approximately a very good estimate, because you could guessed the wrong way, and that could have severe consequences. So that's an important thing, isn't it, Doctor?
Absolutely, and that's so important. Clearly, anytime you're talking about governments and regulations and intergovernmental things, it's messy, it's political, and we understand that. But fundamentally, the process is driven by science, or should be driven by science. And although that's sometimes imperfect, and sometimes the science is not followed as well as it should, the science must be available before it can be followed. The gaps must be filled, and so the CITES process relies upon a good understanding of how many animals are there, what their ecology is, and that's the underpinning both at the international level and then at the national level. And so South Africa has a nationwide program of leopard population estimation, leopard monitoring. And we're working with the authorities in the South African government to make sure that our protocols are the same as theirs, and so that they may use our data. And so this is not trying to usurp anybody to try to get anybody's way. This is contributing willful collaborators with the South Africans themselves, again, to put the best science possible forward for conservation.
Now, any leader of a community, such as you are, faces dissent, people who disagree with the policy or the common policy or how much resistance does your local population have to some of the measures that you are trying to lead regarding leopard conservation and just general animal conservation? Are there people saying, no, why don't we farm that land?
The issue of, in fact, it falls under the challenges of the community as a whole. We only have challenges, which is the triple demon, which is inequality, unemployment, and poverty. So you will find community members who will say, we don't need conservation. We rather have money. We rather have jobs. We rather have all this. Then the issue is a consensus issue. When we hold meetings, we have around 510 plus members in that particular communal property association. What they do, they meet every year and give the leaders a mandate. It's a democratic kind of setup where they will say, this one we don't know, you need to go further and do a research on it. And we take the mandate from the community rather than using autocratic in an African way. We say, if I'm a leader, I'm from the royal family. So there is a democratic processes. I think if now in March we're going back to meet with the community to regain the new mandate. You will always have resistance from the community. There's no way in which you can have a community where you 100% get a buy-in of all members. But usually the majority rule. If 60% of the members says continue with your project and the project, then as a leaders we have to implement it. Yeah.
Doctor, how is this different than how the United States deals with the Native American tribes and gives them certain rights, such as, let's say, gambling and casinos in certain areas, and then the tribes take that money and then distribute it amongst the Native Americans? Is it a similar approach? You're just using animal conservation instead of casinos, or is there some other differences that, or maybe you're not familiar? I don't know.
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on tribal law, and being from Texas, we have very few Indian reservations, so I can't speak as an expert there. I do know that under the American system, the tribes have a certain degree of autonomy when it comes to managing their wildlife resources, and my understanding is the exact degree of autonomy is a little bit different as you go from tribe to tribe, because the treaties under which the reservations were established are slightly different. So one tribe may have rights to its wildlife that another one does not. So it's I know it's very complicated. That's the one thing I do know about it. I think that clearly we're in a different place in North America in our history than Southern Africa is, and so there's some good things and some bad things about that. Africa can look at some of the mistakes that we have made over time and say, I'm glad you made those mistakes. We don't have to. At the same time, they may be able to look at American history or European history and say, there's some positive things that we want to apply. So again, I would not presume to tell any level of government in South Africa how to do their business. My job is simply to offer up the best science I can, so that then when they make the decisions, just as Prince Benjamin said, with his community, they have the best information available for that.
Hunters bring in a lot more revenue per hunter than a photographic tourist brings in. Can you give us an idea of what those numbers are, the difference, approximately?
Yeah, if I remember the most recent figures that I've seen and read, is that one hunter brings in as much as 20 non-consumptive or photographic tourists. So you've got to compare that carbon footprint, for instance. Also, you've got to consider the infrastructure required to accommodate a busload of photographic tourists. I mean, where for a hunting group you need 2 or 4 beds to accommodate a hunter, you would require 40, 60 beds. What about the water supply? Africa doesn't have water. It's an arid region.
South Africa.
Well, southern Africa, for that matter. I mean, it is the arable land there is something less than 5%. And again, I'm speaking under correction there. But we do not have the necessary natural resources, like the water, for instance, to accommodate 60 plus tourists.
Especially tourists who take long showers.
Exactly. And not only that, you've got to build those extra rooms. You've got to accommodate the extra electricity consumption. You've got to accommodate all the extra food and the waste that those 60 people generate. What happens to the waste management here? So let's compare and offset the carbon footprint of the non-hunter and the photographic hunter with the consumptive hunter, the trophy hunter. So it's a no-brainer. The trophy hunter and the hunter, not necessarily a trophy hunter only, hunters in general, generates more profit per hectare than your non-consumptive utilization form of ecotourism. So that is what we need to consider, because in the world we live in, we're talking about global, global warming, right? And the carbon footprint of international, multinational corporates and industries, or governments for that matter. We have something that is called carbon trading these days. So by investing in the green economy or a pro-biodiversity industry like the GBNR or the project GBNR Reserve represents, that creates an opportunity, a potential opportunity for carbon trading, which involves, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 or companies maybe, which is a lot of money. So we need to consider that aspect, and we need to compare that carbon footprint and the best possible use of the land. And the science that Dr. Schwertner and his team provides us with advises on the best land use management policy and strategy. And that needs to be utilized to inform international regulating bodies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So, and also the community, so that they can make informed decision on what is the best use of their land and what will benefit their community members directly. How do we alleviate the poverty? What is the best use of that land?
Prince, let me ask you a question about your people and how they view, let's say, photographic safaris, non-consumptive tourists versus hunters. Do you get a sense that they value one more than the other, that they might look at hunters and say, wow, they bring in so much money, and so that's great for our community? Or do they look at hunters and say, oh my God, they're taking away our wildlife, or they're harvesting some of our valuable resources, and we like the photographic guys because they just come take pictures and then they don't actually take anything except for the water and the long showers. And the waste and all that stuff. But they may not even think about that because that's something that may not be entirely obvious at first. How does your community? I know it's hard because everybody has different opinions, but how do they look at hunters versus non-photographic people? Do they care? Maybe they don't even care.
They do care because I think one of the things which made us to have that reserve, it was a resolution from the community. The land was not being used after being transferred. So we went to the community and say, as leaders, we are elected by these communities. There is a setup called the Balepye Communal Property Association. It manages land. So you have a wing which is the community as an authority by the tribal. So that's where I come from as a leader who goes out. It's like you're a symbol figure out there who represent the community, an aspect of all issues which affect the community. But in the Communal Property Association, when they hold these meetings, you have different opinions. So they do an analysis. Some of the analysis need science, some need business acumen, like your AWS, who comes to us and say, this is how you can be able to use the model in order to generate. So it's for us to take those decisions and say, do we go back to the community? And when we go back, we explain to them, we want to do conservation, but 70% of our core business will be hunting because it generates this much versus photographic tourism. So a decision which was taken is that when we do the comparison in terms of the revenue generation, is that hunting generates more than the photographic tourism.
Approximately 20 times more.
Yeah. Then that's where we took a decision to say, we need to look at people who can support, especially the hunters who can support this project in terms of numbers. We have approximately 30 beds. So if we can have 30 hunters in a period from March to September, October, which is the hunting period, then we can sustain the business because the revenue generated will be plowed back in unemployment because at the moment I think we are employing almost 47. The government is giving us a program where you have 30 odd people who are doing your monitoring and patrols to look at all the snares. So you have 17 which you directly employ from the community. Our vision is to expand to at least 100 because we need more land to expand to 100 so that the 100 in terms of African population, you are impacting on more than 300 people to 400 people because usually one family or one family member, if he works, especially in the area, you have to support the other family members. That's the model of Africa. It's not the same as other countries whereby it's everybody for himself. If I work in my family, I have to do even the extended family and share with the other family. So what we did even in the past is to give at the same time community a land. We give them some hectares to say, as you are busy doing this photographic and hunting, utilize this land for agriculture and other businesses. Because remember, I told you that they were scattered before by the apartheid. Now they are coming back. We said we are looking at the future, that we don't have to have a revolt because people will come and say, you're utilizing this land for certain purposes while we don't get anything. So we gave them 1,000 hectares to utilize it and 8,000 for resettlement. So we are trying to do land allocation in terms of the needs of the community in order to minimize all the risk of revolts and stuff.
Doctor, how long have you been monitoring the situation there and doing a count of the population of wildlife?
So this particular project just got off the ground back in December. So this is a brand new project. We have deployed camera traps. We have about 90 cameras deployed on the site, on the reserve. Those will be that we're going to pull those out, the data off of those very soon, and I'm going to be heading over in March to finish the data collection for this phase. So it's a periodic monitoring. It's not a one-shot thing. Provided that we secure sufficient funding, then in June we're going to go back. We're going to continue the camera trapping, and we'll start the second phase, which is putting radio satellite tracking collars on a subgroup of the leopards to establish how they're using the reserve. With the medium-term goal, say next year or two, to reintroduce lions to the reserve and then monitor how the leopards respond to that lion reintroduction. Francis, I would like to say, address this issue of consumptive, non-consumptive, because from a broader perspective, I have, despite my youthful voice, I have been in conservation and wildlife research for over 20 years, almost 30 years, and I think sometimes it is a false dichotomy when people say we can have consumptive use, we can have hunting, or we can have non-consumptive use, or we can have bird watching. Full disclosure, I'm a hunter. Okay, I'm also a bird watcher. I'm an avid bird watcher, and I travel around and pay really good money to see birds. And I wouldn't trade either of those experiences. And so I think the people who try to pitch it as hunting, there can either be hunting or there can be bird watching or non-consumptive ecotourism versus consumptive ecotourism, I think they're just trying to be divisive.
I agree.
Because, in my opinion, if you're willing to say and you believe that I am for wildlife conservation, then there's a place at the table. We may disagree on some things beyond that, and that's fine, because civil people can disagree. But if we start from the place of wildlife conservation, if we start from the place that we want to continue having good, robust wildlife populations and increase those populations, then that's starting from a place of agreement. And that's where you have to start from, and so that's how I move forward. I don't advocate for hunting necessarily. I don't advocate against hunting. I have my personal views, and then I do the science because at the end of the day, my interest is in wildlife conservation.
One of the things that concerns me of wildlife conservation in anywhere, but particularly in Africa, is that African population is growing. They have a high fertility rate. And animal populations decrease, wild animal population decrease, not so much because they're being hunted to death or a lot of stuff. It's simply that as it's a result of human expansion, encroachment into their territory and converting their habitat into farmland and all the conflicts that therefore ensue. And so my concern, I know South Africa has one of the lowest fertility rates in Africa. I think it's just above replacement rate. It's around 2.2 or 2.3 or something like that. Replacement rate's 2.1. But my concern is I don't know if you're monitoring that fertility rate in the community that we're talking about here, or just general in Africa. Yes, go ahead.
Francis, if I can come in there, we have I don't want to use her name because I didn't ask her to, but there's a lady that we know, Prince Benjamin knows her as well, is trying to do her doctoral at the moment, specifically on that, to ascertain the socio-economic impact on the community from the different forms of ecotourism. So that, I think, would be a worthwhile research project. You know, if only we could get a university that would offer a doctoral in that regard, because I know for a fact she has submitted it to one or two South African universities which have not approved it yet. But perhaps we can address those gaps in our knowledge, as with the gaps in our knowledge when it comes to leopard density and population, doing the same thing. And that is what we're trying to promote here, is do the science, do the research, empower people, give them the opportunity to do that so that we can answer that question. Because right now I don't think we know.
What frustrates you the most?
Oh my goodness.
Frequently it's dealing with me.
I think the biggest frustration for me is that, you know, as an industry, it appears from my perspective, and it's again my personal opinion, that we've been playing defense. I've been in this industry for 30 years, and I have perceived the industry and the industry leaders to play defensively. You know, it's rather similar to the precautionary principle in science, where they try and err on the safe side rather not on. They don't take any risk. There's no serious risk appetite here, or any risk appetite for that matter. And I believe we should be more proactive and start playing offensively. I like to explain it to people like a football match. At the football match.
That's soccer for Americans.
Well, all right. Let's talk about rugby then. It's like gridiron, but it's for men. We don't wear any PPE or body armor or things like that. This is played by real men.
You guys are real men, yes. Agreed.
So back to the point. What I try and get to is that there are spectators and there are participants and there are referees, and typically the spectators know best. But they can't score a try. So what we're trying to do is to score tries here. We need to change our perspective and our narrative and our strategy and be offensive when it comes to this battle that has been raging in the biodiversity sphere, conservation issue or industry. Because we have, say, 20% of the global population in favor of consumptive utilization. Another 20% is non-consumptive and animal rightists, which I think is just irrational and emotionally driven people. You can't have a conversation with them. They're not open-minded. And then you have 60% of the global population that's undecided but are rational. But they don't know if they're in favor of consumptive or non-consumptive. So we need an offensive strategy, a proactive approach to educate and inform that undecided 60%, because they have the power through social media to inform policy and to dictate trade, like we've seen happen at COP18 just now. But they don't have the information. They don't know what they don't know. So as an industry, we need to educate them. But we can't do it if we're playing defense all the time. We need to come out with a working solution, innovative, creative solutions to old problems. We need to build bridges, like my friend Dr. Schwertner just explained. We need to find a middle way or a seat at the table for everybody. We need to present ourselves in such a way that we are acceptable to the global community. And that we cannot do if we are playing offensive and if we are playing into the hands of the animal rights groups by providing them with a large stick to beat us with. So that is my frustration. And then obviously we just need, there's project-specific frustrations and then there's the industry-related frustrations. But yeah, I think that was probably the thing that frustrated me most, is that attitude and approach of playing defensively, because it hasn't worked in 30 years, because every year we lose the right to trade in another species. And losing that right to trade impacts the families on the ground that Prince Benjamin can explain to you much more in detail than I can. But I've seen children with Kwashiorkor syndrome, thousands and thousands and thousands of them. So the pro-utilization approach addresses that. We provide them with a source of protein. We provide them with employment. We create employment. We create education. We address the issues. And that's a proactive approach. But we need to document it. We need to research it. And we need to publish it, peer-reviewed publications. And then we need to cast that narrative and show it to the world, because we are not doing a good job at it. Anthropomorphism is ruling the world at the moment. Nature deficit disorder, it's not an official term, but it's being used a lot these days. We're sitting with a global community that has been urbanized. There's a total disconnect. They have no idea of what the impact and the realities are on grassroots level. They don't. Yet they take an emotional knee-jerk decision. They donate funds to an animal rights organization which puts a trigger out there that involves decisions and livelihoods of people in rural Africa. I don't think that's acceptable. We need to address that and remedy that.
Very good. Any final words that you have, Prince Benjamin, regarding a message that you would send to Americans or Europeans or Australians, who are the audience of this podcast? What would you want to say to them?
The best that they could do is to support the project. But supporting that project is to make sure that they come and hunt in Africa, especially in our project. And one more thing about the frustration, which I'll have to add, is the CITES conference regulative environment, which to me stifle trade. In terms of the WTO's principles, one of the things, or the principles there, is to promote trade. And CITES falls under that WTO principles. So from the community point of view, I would like them to listen to communities on the ground and be able to relax this laws which stifle trade. I mean, the first example which I was in CITES in Geneva, they were talking about the giraffe, to be listed in Appendix 1, I can't remember 2 or 2. So we've got a lot of giraffes there. So once you do that, you say we need to have a CITES permit. So you are gradually regulating trade in a manner that stifle the livelihoods of our community. So that is the first frustration which from my community we are looking at. And I've realized that not many communities are represented in that decision-making bodies. So we will want a voice there rather than governments talk about on behalf of the community, which some of them doesn't put the aspiration of the communities on the ground. So for me, it's all about dealing with those triple challenges, which is your poverty, which I see every day. And because one hunter, to be honest, when it comes to our community, we always take that meat which is left and give it to the communities, especially kids. We don't sell. From our model, we always take the meat and give it to creches around the area to teach them about the wild meat, the wild industry, and also to deal with the issues of food security.
Now, a lot of Americans might be listening to this who are not hunters. They might say, really? You guys eat the meat? Or do you eat giraffe?
Yes.
Do you eat hippopotamus?
Yes.
Do you eat elephant?
Yes, we eat each and every time. There are people, in my totem, I can't eat an elephant because it's my totem. But there are communities, especially when you hunt an elephant.
Explain what a totem is.
A totem is my traditional praise name. Praise each and every community around Africa. They have their praise. But
not your whole community has the same totem.
Yeah, not the whole community, but if we say Balepye, we are talking about an elephant. It's our species. We respect that species. It's the same as we go to India. When they see a cattle, they bow. So for us, when we see an elephant, it's in line with our totem. So we praise the elephant.
But snakes are good.
No.
Oh, you don't eat snake? You don't eat snake?
No, we don't eat snakes.
Oh, my God.
Maybe in China.
No, there's definitely African communities that eat snake. I've seen it. I've actually
there are those, but in our community, they will even be surprised. We don't eat.
So I found finally one thing that you guys will not eat. It's snake.
Snakes, dogs, like in China. Now we've got a corona, you see, we don't eat those. We don't want to eat those things which can cause diseases in our communities. We've got a staple kind of meat. In the wild also, I'm a Christian who doesn't eat certain animals also. You call them, you are Zionist. I fall in that group because I don't eat pork also. You may eat pork, but I don't eat. So there are also certain, like a rabbit I don't eat. I follow Deuteronomy 14 in terms of my beliefs. But, so there are communities around the area that are different who can eat your elephant. Yeah, so
it's not going to waste.
Yeah,
the meat. Right. Okay. Last question. For most people that are listening to this are probably leaning more toward photographic safaris than hunting safaris, just because that's the demographics of the planet, and this is not a hunting specific podcast. So, whether they want to go, whatever safari they're thinking about, consumptive or not, how can they actually learn more about where to sign up, where to go, prices, things like that? Is there a website that you can send them to?
Yes, definitely, Francis. We have a website, www.africanwildlifeservices.co.za. I'll repeat that, www.africanwildlifeservices.co.za.
And I'll translate that for Americans. That ZA means ZA.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's what you all call it. That 100%. I agree. Yeah, they can also phone me, or send text or WhatsApp messages. I have a number there. It's an American number for now. They can use it. It's +1 for the international dialing code 254-964-8808. And I use WhatsApp, and there's Facebook and Instagram, the social media, and they can inquire there, and we can definitely accommodate all forms of ecotourism. We welcome that, and we cater for them.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you, sir.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to wanderlearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now for 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it somewhere. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at wanderlearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.